folks, and welcome to this week's Hi-Fi review. And I've got a DAC for you, a DAC from China, from Topping specifically. This one is called the D90Le. Don't confuse this with the D90SE. The SE looks, well, it looks exactly the same as the LE. The SE includes some pseudo surround software enhancements, and specifically, and in terms of its headline feature, it includes MQA. The LE does not include MQA. Thing is though, the SE is £100 dearer, so the SE is a penny short of £900. The LE without MQA is a penny short of £800. So £800 for the LE. Now, I know a few people out there, quite possibly yourself, really don't care for MQA. So on that basis, the LE, the one I'm looking at today, would be your DAC of choice. So hopefully I've headed off any possible confusion. Now, before we get to some techie talk, I'd like to talk about Topping itself. If you don't want to see this bit, if you want to skip to the closer look section or even the sound quality section, go down below in the description. There are chapter headings. You can navigate around this video and you can skip this bit. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about Topping. I think they're worthy of a comment right now. Before I talk about this product in some depth, I just wanted to talk about what's behind it, at least in my case, in the UK. And I'd like to focus on the brand for a minute, and connected with that, you, which on a circular level directly reflects onto this product. Topping, the people who make this DAC, has been around for a little while now. Actually, Topping as a brand has been in the hi-fi enthusiast's vision for quite a while now. Such familiarity is essential for success. Doing well in the hi-fi industry is mostly about hanging on in there and maintaining consistency, waiting to be noticed, and above all, accepted at some point. Once your feet are under the table, you're in, and you can make a decent business in cooperation with the customer base. Now, I have to hand it to Topping. The company has given it a real go. It's been persistent, it's worked with its customers, it's been dogged, and it's been very serious about establishing itself in the hi-fi industry. I first heard of the company Topping when you could only see its products from outlets based in places like Hong Kong. The D90Le, though, the box I'm reviewing in this video, well, that arrived from its official UK distributor, a company called Electromod. And if you want to buy directly from Electromod, I'll put some links below. You can check out their online shop. Anyway, Topping itself has come a long way. On a broader level, Chinese hi-fi still breeds some mistrust amongst some hi-fi fans, if the comments I've seen on the internet are anything to go by. Partly because China is such a long way away. Also because you're often buying blind and you, generally speaking, don't see them on the high street with high street dealers. There's also often an inherent lack of trust in Chinese hi-fi because many users out there lump the good Chinese-derived hi-fi with the bad, and then they assume it's all bad. And let's not forget that the now hallowed Japanese hi-fi products used to be viewed in exactly the same way. In the early 70s, if I, for example, asked somebody about a piece of technology, the sort of reply I would get is, well, yeah, this is great. It's made in the UK or Germany or France or the USA. None of that Japanese rubbish. Japanese tech back then was derided. It was even, a bit later on, feared. And look how Japan grew from there, hey? It's exactly the same with China and its tech. There are some very good companies out there from China, and Topping is one of them. They've got their heads down and they're getting on with it. And I like this move to a distributor model from this Chinese company. As I say, in this case, in the UK, Electromod. Now, yes, Topping sells on the likes of Amazon, and that's a useful outlet for a number of reasons, and it fits right in for a number of users. But the addition of a distributor is a good move, I would say. What Electromod in the UK, and any good distributor, no matter what territory you're talking about, what they give you, especially if they're dealing with a company who's based a long way away, they provide people who know what they're talking about instead of some kid who's sitting in a call center. You get a local phone call if problems occur. You get a human voice at the end of the phone, someone who will work with you to correct your issues if any issues do occur, and so on. In short, as I stand here making this video, I look at Topping now as a professional hi-fi company who is providing evidence that they care about their customers, and they're backing that up with investment. So far, so good. Now, before we get to the closer look section, I just want to talk about the DAC chip in this box, which is made by ESS. Now, the headline feature of this DAC, as I say, is this DAC chip, and you might call that obvious. That's not always the case, though. Sometimes DACs will shove in a decent chip, and then they'll pay more attention to what's going on around that chip. And to some extent, Topping is the same. That's what they've done here. However, there is focus on the actual DAC chip, partly because in the past, Topping has always shown a liking for AKM chips. Problem is, AKM supplies are running very short, still running very short, and that's the consequence of a disabling and quite devastating factory fire, which AKM is still trying to recover from. Now, as I say, Topping has always preferred AKM to ESS, and I must admit that I have followed the same mindset. I've always found AKM to produce possibly more naturalistic sound output, and AKM chips were always my favoured digital source, and I look forward to the day when AKM back at full capacity and we can hear their sound once more. Now, Topping's preference also has another angle. It has a hardware angle, a sound output angle, because there is a thing going around the hi-fi industry which talks about certain ESS chips and a little peak of distortion, which has been known as the hump, that apparently can cause some issues. Now, other people say that this distortive hump can be negated by careful design, and I must admit, I haven't heard this distortive hump myself. Now, maybe that's because the DACs I've heard are good designs, so you don't hear that. I haven't heard that, but even so, that's the word on the hi-fi streets. Now, maybe Topping have heard this issue, and maybe that's why they've avoided ESS. I'm not too sure. However, nevertheless, Topping do use an ESS 9038 Pro chip in this box, and it apparently bypasses any perceived hump effects by pairing each of the included 8 channels to produce 4 channels of balanced output, and this particular DAC is a balanced DAC. It's this tweak that, says Topping, gives you the enhanced performance from this box. Well, we will see. In fact, we will see beginning now, because I think we need to take a closer look. Now, the D90Le offers a relatively small footprint of 222mm by 160 by 45mm, with a weight at just over 1 kilogram. Yet it's large enough and stylized enough to look like a piece of grown-up hi-fi, if you get my drift. That is, the D90LE has the aesthetics and the styling to fit right into a listening room shelving rack. It's demure enough and conservative enough without any outlandish flashing lights or quirks to slot into any high-end digital system. It has the ability to blend into the background, but to do so with a measure of style. Before we look at the furniture adorning the chassis, be assured that you do get a remote control. This will be familiar to anyone who's come across a topping product in the past. It's the usual topping remote. In this case, it can change the volume on the DAC, it can add a mute function, input selection, display, screen, brightness, and there are filter choices. And let me talk about filters. Now, I've said before that I dislike the user-defined filter ethic. I would much prefer for topping to give me a single, tonally balanced, built-in, factory-set default filter instead, and for the instructions never to mention the word. Now, some users out there will riffle through this filter selection, and there are 7 of them, and they won't hear any differences, and that's fine. Thing is, though, I do, and many others out there will too. As it is, though, there's too much leeway for the inexperienced beginner to accidentally select the wrong filter. For example, the rather harsh, the rather bright brick wall filter. Then that user will be convinced that the D90LE was overly clinical, and then they'll dump the entire box as a bad lot. Also, for the same beginner, if filters have to be here at all, then I wish topping would filter the incomprehensible filter names and give them real-world terms instead. In practical terms, the filters act like tone controls. That's the end sonic result of selecting these things. So, if you must include them at all, give them tone-like real-world names instead of merely repeating the names printed in the ESS chip tech documents. Fine, if you're of a geeky persuasion, have the actual names printed in the manual somewhere, put them on the website, and then you can access them and you can bathe in all their complex glory. But for the general consumer, these names should not be shoved in their faces. Topping has always refused to take responsibility for this area, and I think it's important, and I think they're wrong. Imagine for a moment if you're working for Apple, okay, and this product was labeled Apple, and you worked for Apple, and you told your manager, who happens to be a very nice guy called Bob, incidentally, that its end users were going to have to tackle terms like fast roll-off corrected minimum. Now, despite being a nice guy, Bob would laugh in your face and then send you on gardening leave. But hey, that's Bob for you. For the record, I would select filter 4, which is called slow roll-off linear, because of course it is, hey, as the best balanced sound. The default is filter 5, which is the fast roll-off linear. Filter 5, in my opinion, doesn't sound as good. So, you buy a D90LE, you open up the box, you hook it up to the hi-fi, and what you're hearing, in my opinion, is not as good as it could be, because you haven't selected filter 4. And that's because, once more, I feel filter 4 is the most tonally balanced option. On the front panel is a clean white OLED screen. Now, some people bizarrely have criticized this screen because it's not in full color, doesn't feature a host of touch screen capable icons, and no doubt doesn't include Netflix. But look, I'm not watching TV here. I just want the information supplied simply and fast. And the D90LE does just that. And that to me is all that matters. The screen itself shows the input, it shows the output, the sampling rate, and the volume, plus the sound format. For example, PCM or DSD. To the right of the screen are 2 volume buttons. To its left is a power button. Now, if you reach behind and you flick on the rocker power switch, and you keep the power button on the front pressed down, then you enter the setup menu, where you can change a whole host of options, such as the auto power on and off, screen brightness, a preamp mode or DAC mode. You can enable or disable Bluetooth. Line out options can be altered, so you can instruct the DAC to only output to XLR or RCA or both. There are filter settings for sound output. There's also different polarity options. You can even change the voltage outputs for the likes of powered speakers and quirky preamps. The selection here is pretty comprehensive. Let's swizzle the chassis around now and look at the rear. And you can see from the left a pair of XLR outputs, a pair of single-ended RCAs, an IIS input, you get coax, you get optical, and there is Bluetooth. There's a USB input as well, an AES input, then on the far right, an IEC power socket, and a rocker power switch. In resolution terms, USB and IIS can handle up to 32-bit 768 kHz in PCM and native DSD 512. Coax, optical, and AES, well, they can't quite hit those heights. So you're looking at figures up to 24-bit 192 or DSD 64. And incidentally, IIS is exactly the same as I2S or I2S, depending on how you want to say it. So, how does this one sound? Well, let's go through to the sound quality tests and we will find out. Welcome to the sound quality tests for the topping D90Le Dac, and I hooked up an Audiolab CD transport, my 6000 CDT, to this DAC, and I played some Emmylou Harris. It's an album on the Grapevine label called Red Dirt Girl, and I played the first track called The Pearl. Now, I chose this CD because I'm not particularly pleased with the mix. In fact, I think the mix on this album is a car crash. It's too busy, there's too much squeezed into small spaces, it makes it sound claustrophobic, it's densely packed, there's too many instruments seemingly squeezed into the stereo image area. Reverb seems to be rather overdone, cymbal splashes sound a little constricted. I'm not a fan, which means it's a challenge for this DAC. Now, to repeat, this is a balanced DAC. However, I began in single-ended mode because not everyone have balanced connections on their amplifier. So, is this DAC worth buying if you're only able to play single-ended mode? Well, if you forgive my Brian Wilson approach to hi-fi, I could hear good vibrations emanating from the topping in single-ended mode. What specifically grabbed me was the packed stereo image, that area right at the center of the stereo pair. On this track, I'm used to that car crash pile-up of instruments, vocal and effects, but the topping, bless its little cotton socks, managed to sort it out into some semblance of order. The lead vocal had, well, amazingly, space around it. The lead electric guitar was isolated from the earlier mess. It was lovely to hear an acoustic guitar distinctly offering a metallic strum effect, while the percussion was suddenly free to maneuver. I could even hear some secondary percussion now. Wonders will never cease. That the topping could give this track a sense of focus was an achievement all on its own, and for me, right there and then, was worth the price of admission. So I wondered what the balanced play would sound like, and before I could hear that balanced play, I had to go into the settings and I had to tell the topping that I wanted to output to XLR, and once I did that, I could hear music. You've ever seen an accordion? You've ever looked directly at an accordion, one that's sort of packed away, it's all squeezed together, you know, those foldy bits in the middle? Well, That was this music, BT, before topping. Single-ended mode actually improved that situation. Balanced mode pulled that accordion apart and stretched that middle bit so you could see detail in between the folds of the accordion. So space was inserted in between instruments. The instruments themselves, they were pushed left and right, giving a new sense of relaxation to the soundstage and giving the lead vocal space to work in without elbows bumping. I then tried Bluetooth and I drafted in my Astle and Kern CAN Alpha and I played the Dove's Universal Want LP and the title track from the same, and I pushed that through aptX HD at 24-bit 96 kHz. Now look, Bluetooth is not exactly my favorite delivery system. It's not perfect, but this Bluetooth replay was one of the best Bluetooth performances I've ever heard from a desktop DAC. The vocal was remarkably coherent, focused with a sense of direction. There was no obvious high-frequency noise to speak of, well, unless the music was really pushed, and I'm talking vocal and guitar crescendos. There were some slight wobbles in the upper areas of the mid-range, but that's a Bluetooth thing, it wasn't a topping thing. Even so, generally, mid-range performed remarkably well, as did bass, which was very strong, and on the whole, I was impressed. It almost gave me hope that Bluetooth could actually amount to something. And as a by-the-by, the transition on this track from indie rock to acid house, well, it's just sublime. But back to the hardware. And that's not all in Bluetooth terms. I wanted to try another codec, so I had a go at LDAC. And that, moving from aptX HD to LDAC, well, that sounded a bit like moving from single-ended mode to balanced mode. The stereo image via LDAC really opened up. It became less a point in the distance and more an area to explore. Bass was almost organic in its bouncy roundness, while the reverb hanging off the vocal was almost dreamy. So no, this was the best Bluetooth performance I've ever heard from a DAC, any DAC. Bluetooth has never had me waggling my foot, bouncing the other knee, swaying my head from side to side, and playing air drums all at the same time. The D90Le had me doing just that on this track. Blimey. I then leapt from my chair and connected the same digital audio player into the rear of the D90Le with an optical cable this time, and that changed the overall sound to a more trim and direct source, a concentrated source with sharper beats, impactful bass, and a faster pace. To be honest though, I kind of missed LDAC Bluetooth. Good grief, I never thought I'd ever say that. I must insert a quick mention of a sort of EQ option called sound mode. Now this is a bit of a weird one because sound mode cannot be found in the instructions. Well, I couldn't find them. Maybe they're there, maybe you can find them. I couldn't see them. So my guess is that sound mode is a last-minute entry as part of a firmware update, and Topping has shoved that option in. And what it is, well, it's basically EQ with fancy labels, so you can play sound mode to give valve-like sound, and you can also switch it to transistor-like sound. But a lot of these EQs, they sound good, haha, but the implementation is a bit, nah, you know what I mean? So basically, valve-like sound in sound mode muddies the mid-range, softens it, makes the detail less interesting, less distinct, and it's supposed to be valve equals softish sound, which is not true, but that's what sound mode gives you in this particular EQ option. The transistor mode, well, that just takes the mid-range and it sharpens a bit. It sharpens the detail. Again, it just sounded a bit false to me. It sounded unnecessarily edgy, just a little bit, not overly, not as bad as, say, a brick wall filter, for example, but there's a little bit of edge. You might like it. To me, it's just, I don't know, it's just sounds false. It just sounds as though you're tweaking with what's already nice. It just ruins things, really. So I turned this off. Now, before I end, this DAC, I feel, is an ideal upgrade if you have a Bluesound Node. I connected the LE to the Node, and then I ran balance cables from the LE into my hi-fi, and that brought the Node to life. Streaming, for example, Amazon Music provided a big open soundstage with plenty of air and space, giving a larger than life sound. I then moved to Qobuz and I played Bon Jovi's You Give Love a Bad Name, apparently, so the rumors say, and what I heard was fun and very listenable. Yes, there was that streaming tightness around the upper mids as dynamic reach hit a ceiling, which is what I always hear with streaming, which has nothing to do with the topping, I hasten to add. It's all about the streaming thing. But within those limits, there was plenty to like here. Frequency discipline was respectable indeed. I was happy to see that the mids did not sound clinical at all. They wandered up to the edge, but they never became an issue, while bass was punchy and aggressive, in a good way. The lead vocal from Jambon Jambon was pretty smooth for a stream. Then I moved to Garbage, the band that is, and their self-titled album, and the track Super Vixen on Qobuz. This album was full of energy, and again, I was happy to hear that output. It sounded rather nice. There was, well, not so much a 3D effect around the stereo image. It didn't quite get that far, but there was some depth there, and that added to the richness of the soundstage. So that's the review of the topping D90Le. How do I conclude this review? Well, let me give you a few final thoughts, then we'll look at some pros and cons, and then I'll give you a rating. To state the obvious, this is a feature-packed little unit. It does a lot and it sounds excellent. The choices and options available are much appreciated. The interface works well. I happen to love the OLED screen because, well, I forgot all about it, and that's the biggest compliment I can give it. Each source option was well designed, was efficiently implemented, and provided superb performance for the money. And yes, I would say that this DAC, despite the price of a penny short of £800, provides real value for money. For many users out there, this little box might very well revolutionize their digital system. Pros and cons. First up, I loved single-ended play, and that's important if you don't have a balanced option on your amplifier. It's worth buying even for single-ended play, is this DAC. If you do have a balanced option, absolutely, grab it for that as well. Balanced play is excellent. It really infuses the soundstage with lots of air and space. I liked the interface. It was easy to use, direct. All the essential information was there. And if you want to be exotic about it, there are some extra toys to play with. Price, okay, yes, it's not the cheapest DAC on the block. However, for what you get, for the sound quality, I think it's well worth it. In the bad column, those filters. I feel they're shoehorned into this DAC without any thought, without any processing, without any care and attention for the possible customer. And I just feel their implementation is a bit shoddy. However, once you set your filter, and hopefully you set it properly and correctly, it's a one hit, and then you can forget about it for the rest of the life of this DAC. Despite my thoughts on the filters, that does not impact on the final rating. I loved this DAC. I think it's an important DAC, and I think it's worthy of your attention. I think it goes over and above what you might expect for a top quality DAC, and because of that, I'm going to give it a 9 and a deeply groovy. Congratulations to topping. And that's it, folks. Thanks very much for staying to the end of this video. And if I could ask you down below if you could click on the like and subscribe buttons, I'd be chuffed to bits. Further down in the description, there are other links to my Facebook group, my website, and also Patreon, which funds directly this channel. Without Patreon, this channel ain't going anywhere. And as for me, I'm going back to bed. So Patreon is important. There is also a whole host of exclusive items on Patreon, so check that out too, please. Any support is much appreciated. Where are we? It's Monday. So Friday, we're going to be looking at hi-fi news, etc. There'll be lots of goodies on Friday, I'm sure, and I hope to have your company. Until that time, folks, bye-bye for now.